We screamed into space and heard the echo. Part C, Point of No Return. 2523, EIC Frigate Pegasus, Earth Orbit. Amy was practically bouncing with excitement as she clung to Xandra's hand. Calm yourself, child, Xandra's mental message popped into Amy's mind, but it did nothing to dampen her mood. A real warship. With guns and captains and everything. How could she not be excited? When Aspero had docked to the Pegasus at Earth's orbit, Xandra did tell Amy something about delivering something the warship needed, but Amy wasn't paying attention. The view of Earth and the full moon were pretty, but they didn't hold as much interest to the young Amy as the warship Pegasus did. She wanted to go aboard and have a look around. Frank tried to explain that they usually saw no more than the berthing port and maybe storage beyond, but Amy wouldn't hear it, instead jumping physically at the opportunity when Xandra said she was going to visit an acquaintance on the bridge of the Pegasus. Amy begged and pleaded, and finally Xandra relented. You are 10 soul cycles old, so you are old enough to behave yourself. As long as you do exactly as I say. Understood? Xandra bargained. Amy agreed. She would have agreed if it cost her her left foot, and she would have thrown her right one in as well. That is how she found herself at the fancy spinny door to the Pegasus Bridge. Xandra greeted the soldier guarding the entrance by name. Amy heard Kelvin or Carl or something like that. She was too busy trying to look at everything at once, twisting her head this way and that, not wanting to miss a thing. Going to see Lieutenant Sill? Calbert asked Xandra. Xandra gave a curt nod in reply. Correct. Thank you for putting in a good word to have Amy come along as well. She is excited about practically every part of the ship. No problem. Last I saw Amy she could barely crawl. That was on Venus, wasn't it? The floating cities are marvels, aren't they? Calvern said. Amy ignored him, pulling at Xandra's hand, impatient to be let in. Sorry for keeping you both. Go on in, he said, letting the door to the bridge slide open and ushering them in. Xandra walked up to the only other blue humanoid on the bridge, who turned around and stared at her. Xandra stared back. Amy glanced around wide-eyed at the disappointing lack of blinking instrumentation around her. Where she would have expected readouts and buttons were only blank panels that stood conspicuously before each officer on the bridge. At least the big screen showed something, even if it was only a big image of the Earth. Meanwhile, the two Civics stared at each other. Amy knew they were conversing, but there was no sound made between them. Amy didn't let Xandra know, but Amy was listening in on the two blue aliens' telepathy, marveling at how they could remain so expressionless while they practically shouted at each other. Xandra seemed especially annoyed. Amy could tell because Xandra's eyebrow twitched every now and then. A human child? Sill questioned mentally. I did not take you for picking up stray pets. Amy is not a pet. I am raising her as my own, and it has nothing to do with you. I did not come here to be lectured. We are not in training anymore. Teacher did mention that taking on another was no life for a navigator. We have been traveling together for 10 soul cycles now, and there have been no obstacles that my crew and myself could not overcome. You burdened them as well then. They would have it no other way. Still. How much longer do you intend to keep the human? You know they have terrible temperaments. Yazix lost an arm to one, and teacher always said we should keep our distance of at least 2 light years. Teacher isn't very practical, and Amy isn't like that. She is a sweet dear that wouldn't hurt anyone. Yazix is a fool and likely deserved it. HMPH, Sill's mental noise sounded so much like a cow she had heard on one of the Kuiper Belt centripetal stations that Amy let out a giggle, causing both navigators to glance at her before they returned to staring at each other and continuing their silent mental duel. Yazix had more sense than you, it would seem. Sill continued, I do not mean to seem crass or uncaring. I do still care for you, Xandra. Our species is spread out thinly among the stars, and those that have become devotees of the first are giving the rest of us a bad name. We can't afford to lose more of us to silly things like taking on a Dospering beast child. I don't want to argue with you anymore, Sill. How is the EIC treating you? Xandra tried to change the subject, disappointing Amy as she would have liked to see her adopted mother tear this Sil apart with her cold logic like she did with Krim and Frank. The captain of the Pegasus is what you would expect of an EIC higher-up. Arrogant, vain, and bossy. At least he is competent, unlike the last one I worked for. That one was sent to Europa to dig up ice until he shrivels up from old age. HMPH. You always try to change the subject when it doesn't suit you. So when will you leave the human behind? Sil was clearly talking about her again, and Amy didn't like it or him. She stuck her tongue out at the blue humanoid, but no one noticed her. I would never. Xandra's mental communication was interrupted by a siren that began blaring through the bridge. Head back to your ship, Sil said out loud as he turned back to the blank screen in front of him and his hand flew over the surface as if pressing buttons there. He must have been checking what the cause of the alert was. Amy only then realized that the glasses each officer wore on the bridge gave them a view of the readouts and buttons on the otherwise clear panels. That must be what they called argumental reality of glasses. Amy wondered if she would use those one day. The captain, resplendent in his smart military uniform, captain's cap, and nameplate reading Rainer, marched onto the bridge as Xandra was trying to reach for the young Amy's hand. Amy fell back to her old habits and danced out of Xandra's reach while she took great interest in the suddenly bustling bridge. Clear the bridge, Captain Rainer ordered as he took his seat in the captain's chair, following it up with a curt report. Soldiers suddenly surrounded Xandra and began to shove her out of the bridge. She struggled against them while she reminded them of the Accords and her neutrality, but her protests fell on deaf ears. I just want to get my child, then I will be out from under your feet. But they didn't listen and Amy remained hidden. Out of options, Xandra spoke to Amy telepathically. Come to me, Amy. Come now. But Amy shook her head, her eyes watching those on the bridge jump to their battle stations. Get her out of here, the captain bellowed, and with that the hesitant soldiers bodily lifted the struggling Xandra and threw her unceremoniously out of the bridge, and stood in the doorway to bar her return. From her vantage point, she could see Kevin trying to console Xandra while guiding her gently away from the door. Amy could hear their conversation over the hustle and bustle of the bridge. Don't worry, who she thought was named Kal-El said, I'll take care of her. But you need to be back on your ship. Once the emergency is over, I will bring Amy to you again. Now go. I'll hold you to that, Xandra said, finally relenting, but Amy could feel an uneasiness coming from her, one that she came to later recognize as a terrible sense of foreboding. 2523, Aspero, Earth Orbit. Xandra strapped herself into her chair as Krim, dressed in a proper pilot suit, declared they were going to launch. Her gaster, which Frank called a bubble butt, twitched with nervousness from behind the chair she sat on. Where is Amy? Galga asked worriedly, making bubbles inside her hydration suit while being the last of the crew to be similarly strapped into her seat. Xandra quickly answered, she is safe on the Pegasus. We will pick her up once the emergency is over. What is the problem anyway? Someone is trying to run the blockade. Krim answered grimly, as if anyone attempting such a thing was the biggest Shaz brain in the galaxy. Towards or away from Earth? Away. They are coming out. Oh, Shaz. Xandra said under her breath, causing the others to look at her strangely. Xandra never swore. Hasn't happened in over a decade and we have front row seats, Frank said, sitting back in his chair. Not that we know of. Do you think the EIC would report every single attempt? Krim countered. If you put it that way, Frank scratched his chin with his misshapen metallic finger. Their ship detached from the Pegasus and slowly floated out into space. Frank was right. They could see the offending ship rocketing towards them with the blue Earth looming large behind it. I would rather not watch this from so close, Krim said, trying to suppress her worry. So you think it's contaminated? With the Echo? Like the rest of Earth? Galga muttered, blowing more bubbles in her suit. Doesn't matter what we think. EIC believes anything that crosses that line is infected and will, Frank began. A beam of light shot from the Pegasus towards the oncoming enemy. That he finished. The beam struck the side of the oncoming vessel and bounced off harmlessly, leaving a line burned into their vision of the path of the high-powered laser. Mirror coating. Whoever they are, they came prepared for that at least, Frank mused. But they should be getting very hot right about now. The approaching silvered ship jettisoned a panel where the laser had stuck, sending it careening off to the side. That is one way to get rid of the heat, Frank said. Now isn't the time to admire their ingenuity. They are heading straight for us. Get our engines up and get us out of here. Krim ordered. I have been doing that since Zandy got back, Frank replied. You know they take a while to warm up. They all knew it was too late. The mirrored cylinder of a ship shot past them before the mechanical weapons of the Pegasus could find their bearing and fire a barrage of micro-rockets at the escaping vessel. Krim managed to turn their ship around just in time to watch the explosion as the Pegasus weapons tore through the silvered rocket, including the paneling it had lost earlier. It was a small marvel how the Pegasus didn't hit the Aspero at all. Hidden by the light of the fireball, a section of silvery hull flew at the Aspero, striking it with enough force to send both hurtling towards Earth. Engines! Now! Krim ordered again. Almost. There! Ready and full speed ahead, Frank answered. The Aspero's engines roared into life, halting their backwards trajectory towards Earth just as a warning light came on. Shaz! We crossed the blockade line. Krim swore. The micro-rockets of the Pegasus turned, directed themselves at the Aspero and fired. 2523, EIC frigate Pegasus, Earth orbit. On the bridge, Amy was watching everything on the main screen. The silvery rocket's fiery explosion. The Aspero falling towards Earth. The captain's order to destroy it if it crossed the blockade line. Amy jumped out of her hiding place screaming Geno. With a sick feeling in her stomach, she knew that tiny ship held her entire family and she had just seen what the Pegasus was capable of. Stop! Who let the kid in here? Captain Rayner snapped before turning back to the main screen. Fire! He said as the instruments indicated the Aspero was barely floating across the arbitrary line designated as the blockade. No! The little girl cried out and tried to run up to the captain to make him stop, but Sil caught her by the wrist, arresting her ineffectual fist. She pulled away but froze when her eyes fell on the main screen. She could not turn away from the screen depicting the Aspero with the Pegasus projectiles hurtled towards it. Small flashes of light lined the Aspero as they impacted, followed by a large fireball. Amy's vision became blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. She tried to hold back the sobs she knew were coming. The explosion froze, appearing like a yellow flower against a sky of blue. Amy glanced around the bridge, noticing that both sound and movement had stopped around her. Officers stood motionless, some had mouths agape in mid-sentence, while others were reaching out to an unseen button. Don't cry, Amy. Xandra's voice sounded clearly in Amy's mind before a vision of Xandra appeared to stand before the little girl. Xandra was translucent and hovered slightly above the ground, but Amy could feel she was really there. Mama! Amy leapt to hug Xandra but fell straight through her. She turned and tried again, becoming frustrated and angry. The vision of Xandra knelt next to the girl and patted her on the head, though Amy could not feel her. It is all right to be angry. It is all right to be sad, Amy. I have to go, but I want you to know that your family loves you. I love you, my angry little girl. Amy nodded. She wouldn't cry. She would be brave. Even so, tears streamed down her cheeks. Xandra, the usual deadpan face of the crew, smiled. Frederick, write up a report. Captain Rayner's harsh words brought the sniffling Amy back to the now. Xandra was gone. The Aspero was gone. Her family was gone. Time had resumed and the captain continued barking orders at the executive officer, 2 blockade runners. Both destroyed with prejudice. And Sil, shut that girl up. With a glance filled with contempt and annoyance, the captain marched off the bridge. It was rare that a Zivik showed their emotions, but for once Sil did not look pleased. His hand came down on the crying Amy's head, his fingers clawing against her scalp as he muttered to her, "Poor little human. How terrible. How sad. I am not pleased that a fine breeding partner like Xandra is no more. We are already so few. But as for you, you are lucky I am here, since you will forget and live a happy life. Ignorance is bliss, after all." Amy felt a presence creeping into her mind, and where it went, darkness followed. The darkness sucked away every memory she had of Xandra until only darkness remained. Amy slumped unconscious in Syl's arms and was carried away. Please like and comment about what you liked or disliked in the story. Subscribe if you would like to hear more. Thank you for your support.